Fourthly, they had power to execute judgment against the will of the prince. Samuel killed Agag against Saul's will, but according to the command of God. 1 Samuel 15:32. Against Ahab's will and mind, Elijah caused to kill the priests of Baal, according to God's express law. 1 Kings 18, verse 40. It is true, it was extraordinary, but no otherwise than it is this day. When there is no magistrate that will execute the judgment of the Lord, then they who have power to make the magistrate may and ought to execute it, when wicked men make the law of God of none effect. So the princes of Judah had power, against the king's will, to put Jeremiah to death, which the king supposes when he directs him what to say to them. Jeremiah 38:25. They had really such a power, though in Jeremiah's case it would have been wickedly perverted. See Lex Rex, questions 19 and 20. Fifthly, they had a power to execute judgment upon the king himself, as is the case of Amaziah and Uzziah, as shall be cleared afterwards. I conclude with repeating the argument. If the king be accountable, whensoever this account shall be taken, we are confident our disowning him for the present will be justified, and all will be obliged to imitate it. If he be not, then we cannot own his authority, that so presumptuously exalts himself above the people. Tenthly, if we will further consider the nature of magistracy, it will appear what authority can conscientiously be owned, to wit, that which is power, not authorized power, not might or force, moral power, not merely natural. There is a great difference betwixt these two. Natural power is common to brutes, moral power is peculiar to men. Natural power is more in the subjects, because they have more strength and force. Moral power is in the magistrate. They can never meet adequately in the same subject. Natural power can, mortal only may warrantably exercise rule. Natural power is opposed to impotency and weakness, moral to illicitness or unlawfulness. Natural power consists in strength, moral in righteousness. Natural power may be in a rout of rogues making an uproar, moral only in the rulers. They cannot be distinguished by their acts, but by the principle from which the acts proceed. In the one from mere force and the other from authority. The principle of natural power is in its own might and will, and the end only self. Moral has its rise from positive constitution and its end from public safety. The strength of natural power lies in the sword, whereby its might gives law. The strength of moral power is in its word, whereby reason gives law. Unto which the sword is added for punishment of contraveners. Natural power takes the sword. Matthew 26, verse 52. Moral bears the sword. Romans 13, verse 4. In natural power the sword is the cause, in moral it is only the consequent of authority. In natural power the sword legitimates the scepter. In moral, the scepter legitimates the sword. The sword of the natural is only backed with metal. The sword of the moral power is packed with God's warrant. Natural power involves men in passive subjection, as a traveler is made to yield to a robber. Moral power reduces the conscientious subordination. Hence the power that is only natural, not moral authority, not power, cannot be owned. But the power of tyrants and usurpers is only natural, not moral, authority, not power. Ergo, it cannot be owned. The major cannot be denied, for it is only the moral power that is ordained of God, unto which we must be subject for conscience' sake. The minor also, for the power of tyrants is not moral, because not authorized, nor warranted or ordained of God by his preceptive ordinance, and therefore no lawful magistratical power. For the clearer understanding of this, let it be observed, there are 4 things required to the making of a moral or lawful power. The matter of it must be lawful, the person lawful, the title lawful, and the use lawful. Number 1. The matter of it, about which it is exerted, or the work to be done by it, must be lawful and warranted by God, and if it be unlawful, it destroys its moral being, as the Pope's power, in dispensing with divine laws, is null and no moral power, and so also the king's power, in dispensing with both divine and human laws, is null. Hence that power which is, in regard of matter, unlawful and never warranted by God, cannot be owned. But absolute power, which is the power of tyrants and usurpers, and particularly of this of ours, is in regard of matter unlawful and never warranted by God. Ergo, number 2, the person holding the power must be such as is not only capable of, but competent to the tenure of it, and to whom the holding of it is allowed. And if it be prohibited, it evacuates the morality of the power. Korah and his company arrogated to themselves the office of the priesthood. This power was prohibited to them. Their power, then, was a nullity. As therefore a person that should not be a minister, when he usurps that office, is no minister, so a person that should not be a magistrate, when he usurps that office, is no magistrate. Hence a person that is incapable and incompetent for government cannot be owned for a governor. But the Duke of York is such a person, not only not qualified, as the word of God requires a magistrate to be, but by the laws of the land declared incapable of rule, because he is a papist, a murderer, an adulterer, etc. Fifth, there must be a moral power, a lawful title and investiture as is showed above, which, if it be wanting, the power is null, and the person but a scenical king, like John of Leyden. This is essentially necessary to the being of a magistrate, which only properly distinguishes him from a private man. For when a person becomes a magistrate, what is the change that is wrought in him? What new habit or endowment is produced in him? He hath no more natural power than he had before, only now he hath the moral power, right, and authority to rule, legally empowering him to government. Let it be considered what makes a subordinate magistrate, whom we own as such. It must be only his commission from a superior power, otherwise we reject him. If one come to us of his own head, taking upon him the style and office of a bailiff, sheriff, or judge, and command our persons, demand our purses, or exact our oaths, we think we may deny him, not taking ourselves to owe him any subjection, not owning any bond of conscience to him. Why? Because he hath no lawful commission. Now, if we require this qualification in the subordinate, why not in the supreme? Hence that magistrate that cannot produce his legal investiture cannot be owned. But the Duke of York cannot produce his legal investiture, his admission to the crown upon oath and compact, and with the consent of the subjects, according to the laws of the land, as is showed above. Therefore, number 4, there must also be the lawful use of the power, which must be not only legal for its composure, but right for its practice. Its course and process in government must be just, governing according to law, otherwise it is mere tyranny. For what is government but the subjecting of the community to the rule of governors, for peace and order's sake, and the security of all their precious interests? And for what end was it ordained and continued among men, but that the stronger may not domineer over the weaker? And what is anarchy but the playing the wrecks of the natural power over the moral? Hence, that power which is contrary to law, evil and tyrannical, can tie none to subjection. But the power of the king, abused to the destruction of laws, religion, and liberties, giving his power and strength unto the beast, and making war with the Lamb, Revelation 17, verses 13 and 14, is a power contrary to law, evil and tyrannical. Therefore it can tie none to subjection. Wickedness by no imaginable reason can oblige any man. It is objected by some from Romans 13, verse 1. There is no power but of God. The usurping power is a power. Therefore it is of God, and consequently we owe subjection to it. Answer 1. The original reading is not universal, but this: For there is no power, if not from God, which confirms what I plead for, that we are not to own any authority, if it be not authorized by God. The words are only relative to higher powers, in a restricted sense, and at most are but indefinite, to be determined according to the matter, not all power simply, but all lawful power. Number 2. It is a fallacy from what is said, according to a certain thing, there is no power but of God. That is no moral power, as universal negatives used to be understood. Hebrews 5, verse 4. No man taketh his honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, which is clear, must not be understood for the negation of the fact, as if no man at all doth or ever did take unto himself that honor, for Korah did it, etc. But no man taketh it warrantably with a moral right, and God's allowance, without God's call. So also the universal imperative in that same text must not be taken absolutely without restriction, for if every soul without exception were to be subject, then there could be none left to be the higher powers, but it is understood with restriction to the relation of a subject. So here, no power but of God, to be understood with restriction to the relation of a lawful magistrate. It is also to be understood indiscriminately in reference to the diverse species, sorts, and degrees of lawful power, supreme and subordinate, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, etc., as Peter expresses it, or whether they be Christian or pagan. It cannot be meant of all universally, that may pretend to power, and may attain to prevailing potency. For then by this text we must subject ourselves to the papacy now intended to be introduced, and indeed if we subject ourselves to this papist, the next thing he will require will be that. Thirdly, to the minor proposition I answer, the usurping power is a power. It is a power, I grant. That it is power or authority, I deny. Therefore it is of God by his providence, I concede. By his ordinance, I deny. We may be subject passively, I grant. Actively, out of conscience, I deny. But some will object. Number 2, though the power be usurped, and so not morally lawful in all these respects, yet it may do good. Its laws and administrations may be good. Answer, I grant all is good that ends well, and hath a good beginning. This cannot be good, which hath a bad principle. Good from the entire cause. Some government for constitution good may, in some acts, be bad, but a government for constitution bad cannot, for the acts it puts forth, be good. These good acts may be good for matters, but formally they are not good, as done by the usurper. They may be comparatively good, that is better so than worse, but they cannot be absolutely, and in a moral sense, good. For to make a politic action good, not only the matter must be warrantable, but the call also. It may indeed induce subjects to bear and improve to the best what cannot be remedied, but cannot oblige to own a magistrical relation. Number 2, the nature of the power thus discovered, let us see the nature of that relative duty which we owe and must own as due to magistrates, and what sort of owning we must give them, which, to inquire a little into, will give light to the question. All the duty and deference the Lord requires of us towards them whom we must own as magistrates is comprehended in these 2 expressions, honor requited in the 5th command, and subjection required in Romans 13, etc., 1 Peter 2, verse 13. Whomsoever then we own as magistrates, we must own honor and subjection as due to them. And if so be, we cannot upon a conscientious ground give them honor and subjection. We cannot own them as magistrates. The least deference we pay to magistrates is subjection, as it is required in these words, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, and submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. But this cannot be given to tyrants and usurpers, therefore no deference can be paid to them at all, and consequently they cannot be owned. That this subjection, which is required to the higher power, cannot be owned to tyrants, will be apparent if we consider, number 1, the subjection required is orderly subjection to an orderly power. That we be regularly under him, that is regularly above. But usurpation and tyranny is not an orderly power, orderly placed above us. Therefore we cannot be orderly under it. This is gathered from the original language, where the powers to be subjected to are ordained of God, and the ordinance of God. And he that resisteth the power is counter-ordered, or contrary to his orderly duty. So the duty is to be subject. They are all words coming from one root, which signifies to order. So that subjection is to be placed in order under another relative to an orderly superiority. But to occupy the feet of dignity unauthorized is an ataxy, a breaking of order, and bringing the commonwealth quite out of order, whereby it may appear that in relation to an arbitrary government there can be properly no orderly subjection. Secondly, the thing itself must import that relative duty which the 5th command requires, not only a passive stooping endurance or a feigned counterfeit submission, but a real active duty including obedience to lawful commands, and not only so, but support and maintenance, and that both to the acts of his administration and to his standing and keeping his station, assisting him with all our abilities, both human and Christian, and not only as to the external acts of duties, but the inward motions of the heart, as consent, love, reverence, and honor, and all sincere fealty and allegiance.